Hello again. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14 here to react to the final weekend of SEC regular season baseball play. Everything is in the books. We head to Hoover next week. I'll be down there for a bit, and we're going to talk about what came out of this weekend of significance. Before we do that, a reminder. Our channel brought to you by BetOnline, the number one source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, NBA, and NHL playoffs. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we will start with the biggest series maybe of the college baseball season. That is Texas A&M taking 2 of 3 from Arkansas in College Station. Arkansas wins the series, the Aggies win the series, but Arkansas wins the West. On Friday, A&M beats Hagen-Smith 1-0. Actually, it didn't beat Hagen-Smith. Got the run. The deciding run came in the 11th inning off Will McIntyre on a walk there. I don't think Arkansas had issued a walk for 9 or 10 innings, and it kind of fell apart in the ninth, and McIntyre walked in the winning run. So Arkansas loses a tough one in game one, but gets some revenge in game two. The hot-hitting Hudson White, the catcher, who really seems like he gets a home run or two every weekend these days. He had a big 3-run home run as Arkansas evened the series with a 6-3 win on Friday night. Gage Wood started as both teams did some weird things with their rotations. And Mason Molina, who's been starting all the games, is the number 3 guy, I believe, or the 2 guy. I can't remember now. But anyway, he finished the game with 3 scoreless. Arkansas evens the series. The final game was a laugher. A&M wins that one 14-4. Graham Grahovac, Jace Lavalette each hit home runs. Will McIntyre started this game. He gave up 4 runs in an inning, I think, or maybe an inning and a third. Little concerned with him the way he's ended the season. And Chris Cortez, probably the biggest pitching star in that game. He goes 3 scoreless in relief as he's been so good for the Aggies in that role all year. I think both teams kind of got what they wanted out of this in a way. I know Arkansas would have loved to have had the series win, but both are going to be national seeds in the NCAA tournament. Arkansas just needed 1 win to win the West. It got that. It'll now be the number 2 seed in Hoover. A&M now number 1 in the RPI, and it's going to play the Mississippi State Ole Miss winner on Wednesday. I think that's really interesting, especially if State wins that game. And then Arkansas will now face the South Carolina-Alabama winner of the Tuesday game in a Wednesday game for the Hogs. So interesting series. A&M gets that one in College Station. All right, let's talk about the East and how that got resolved. Kentucky gets a share of the Eastern Division title with Tennessee. Cats had a chance to win the whole thing, but the pitching kind of collapsed in game 3. But games 1 and 2 pretty much dominated by the Wildcats. Ryan Waldschmidt, I don't know if he's going to be player of the week in the league, but he's going to be close. He's got to be on the league short list. Got on base umpteen times against Vandy this weekend. I lost count. It was so many times. The Wildcats really battered Vanderbilt's pitching the first 2 days, just up and down the lineup, walks, hit by pitches, singles, doubles, an occasional home run. The Cats just did to Vandy what they've been doing to teams most of the season and got off to a 2-0 series edge in this one. Vandy returned the favor on Saturday with a 12-4 win, as Kentucky's pitching really couldn't hold the Commodore bats down. J.D. Thompson and Devin Futrell combined on a Sunday, or rather in this case, a Saturday win after doing the same thing to Tennessee last week. So the concern for Vandy leaving the series, Carter Holton's velocity was down in game 2. He left his start after making 1 out. So that might be an injury concern for Vandy going forward. Anytime you see a pitcher lose velocity, that is something to be concerned about. And certainly Carter Holton, the way he left that game, not super encouraging for Vanderbilt. Both teams kind of got what they wanted out of this one. Just as I said with A&M and Arkansas, Kentucky got a share of the SEC title with Tennessee. Cats are probably going to be, based on resume and quad 1 wins, which they are now 14-8 in quad 1. 19-6. Tennessee is 14-8 in quad 1. That's going to be really hard for the committee to ignore, depending on what happens in Hoover next week. But I would say right now, if you pick the field of 64, Kentucky is probably your number one overall seed with a 3 RPI and all those quad one wins. Vandy probably at 13 and 17, going to get in the tournament if it stays the same. But you got conference tournaments coming up. You got upsets in those. You never know what can happen. Vandy is 13 and 17 with a 27 RPI. The quad one record not so hot at 10 and 17, but a lot of those quad one games against the top 5 teams, if I recall correctly, for Vandy. So that may be something the committee takes into consideration. I think Vandy's in right now at this point, but we'll wait and see what happens this week. And that game with Florida, game 3 in Hoover that Vanderbilt's got, could be big. I think the winner probably can rest easy knowing it's getting in. The loser might have to sweat things a little bit depending on what happens elsewhere. All right, Kentucky got a share of the East because Tennessee swept South Carolina and gets the number 1 seed for the tournament by virtue of taking 2 of 3 in Lexington earlier. But these teams will both go in the record books as co-champs of the SEC with 22-8 records, which is incredibly hard to do in this day and age of SEC baseball. The hero of the weekend for Tennessee, probably Christian Moore. He hit 2 home runs and stole a base in game 1. I believe that set the Tennessee single season home run record. He got another one in game 2. Tennessee was down early, but Moore hit a home run in that one, I think, to help get him closer. And then Blake Burke hit a grand slam to open that one open. A.J. Causey had 8 strikeouts. He was the pitching star for the Vols in game 1. Andrew Binke and Combs closed the game with 4 scoreless innings. I think that was game 2. And then Xander Sechrist on Sunday went 6 scoreless, and Combs got the save in that one. So the Vols got great pitching this weekend. South Carolina's pitching was kind of a mess on Friday. Ty Good started, and he struggled. But I think Carolina's still safe in the NCAA tournament projections. Got a 13 and 17 record in the league, and I think got the highest seed. No, I'm sorry, got a 10 seed. So if they go by seeding and tiebreakers, Carolina could be in a little jeopardy, but I don't really think that's going to be the case. 13 and 17 with a 19 RPI should probably help the Gamecocks get in. The KPI, which they're going to look at, Carolina 23 in that. So that could be a little bit of a factor. The RPI higher than the KPI, and this will be the first year they have considered KPI in all things. But anyway, I think Carolina is safe to get in the tournament, but we'll wait and see. Tennessee, of course, is very safe. It's going to be a national seed. It's just a matter of where. It will await the Vandy, Florida winner in its Wednesday game 3, which will be the first of the 2-night games, and it'll be scheduled to start at 4:30 Central on Wednesday. Speaking of the Gators, maybe the shocker of the weekend, Florida took the series at Georgia after Georgia won the opener. Colton Smith goes 8 innings, 12 strikeouts, and Georgia, as Georgia does, gets big home run games. Paul Tates and Dylan Carter both had home runs. I've said time and time again, this is not just a Charlie Condon lineup. It's not just a Condon and Corey Collins lineup. These guys can hit bombs 1-9. That's kind of what Georgia did in game 1, is it got some big home runs from some lower level lineup guys. And Florida, with its backs against the wall, no Ty Evans, no Hayden Yost, that's 2/3 of its starting outfield, somehow wins the next 2. Florida got game 2, 7-4. Cade Curlin and Luke Heyman each hit home runs. The Gators were down on that one, but knocked in between those 2 guys 5 runs in the 8th and the 10th innings as Florida came from behind to get that one. But the Gators really needed to get game 3 after they got game 2, and boy, they did it. Florida wins 19-11 on Saturday. Curlin had 2 more home runs. Caglione did not pitch well in his start, but he did add a home run, and the Gators just got on base up and down the lineup. Florida got on base 26 times in that game and ended up taking the series. And again, what I think was the shocker of the SEC weekend. Florida now 13 and 17. RPI as of Sunday morning is 24. The big thing for the Gators, 28 and 26. Here's why that matters. You got to finish at least one game over 500 overall to get into the NCAA tournament. There is now no way Florida can't be at least a game over 500. If they lose the game to Vandy, they are 28-27. And who knows? Maybe that's an elimination game between those two teams. But they win that one. They're 3 games over 500, even in the double elimination portion. If they were to lose 2 games there, they would still be a game over 500. We've seen teams in the SEC. I remember it happened with Georgia 10 or 12 years ago. Georgia had one of those schedules like Florida did, where it was the number 1 RPI schedule in the country, which is also the case with Florida's. And it just needed to get out of Hoover above 500 to get into the tournament. That was a thinking at the time. Could be a situation for the Gators like that, although I think Georgia's conference record that year might have been better than Florida's was this year, but it's also a tougher league now than it was then. Georgia, a lot riding on this one for the Bulldogs. Look, if you look at computer numbers, this is a national seed. 6 in the RPI, 7 in the KPI. You get 8 national seeds. The computers would suggest Georgia belongs in that crowd. 11-11 against Quad 1. I would have thought Georgia had played more Quad 1 games than that with the schedule, but that's what it says on the printout in front of me. But anyway, I don't know. I mean, here's what we know. We know that Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, A&M are all going to be national seeds. Does the committee have the guts to give the SEC another national seed? That would make 5 of the 8. I don't know. Georgia would seem to be the odd team out in that scenario. And frankly, Georgia not the brand name in baseball that some of the other teams are. And I guess Kentucky's not a brand name either, but Kentucky has now done this 2 years in a row where they're going to at least host. And so maybe that's a little bit more fresh on the committee's mind. Kentucky, with the idea of a team that's really getting good in baseball. They say you're supposed to ignore these things, but we're all human beings, and Georgia's not been great in baseball for a while. So anyway, I don't know if that not being a brand name program will work against Georgia, being borderline at the computers at this point. Again, I think Georgia's deserving. We'll see what the committee says. I think, maybe you win that game in the SEC tournament opener against LSU and maybe take one against Kentucky. That probably does it. But it's going to be very interesting for Georgia. I think that probably you have to win that game against LSU in the tournament opener if you're the Bulldogs to get a national seed. But we will see. All right, let's move on. Speaking of LSU, this team was dead and buried a month ago. LSU, I think at one point was 3-12 in the league. It finishes 13-17. It's got an RPI of Thursday. And again, that game with Georgia could be a big one for LSU. I think LSU probably gets in, but we'll see. The formula for LSU lately has been pitching. And that was the case for LSU this weekend. Pitching came up big as LSU swept Ole Miss. Gage jumped with 6 innings pitched, struck out 8. The bullpen has gotten better. Christian Little and Nate Ackenhausen combined to finish game 1 in effective fashion. And then Holman and Christian Little and Griffin Herring combined to hold Ole Miss to 2 runs, 5 hits on Friday. Tommy White hits his 21st home run in that one. He gets 2 more home runs in game 3 as LSU wins that one 9-3. 7 guys in that one combined to hold Ole Miss to 3 runs. I've told you that LSU's pitching depth, I think, has been underrated, and it came up big in game 3. So LSU, I think, with a 30 RPI and a KPI this morning of 21, that's even better. LSU, to me, passes the look test as an NCAA tournament team. I don't think having LSU on the nameplate is going to hurt them either. I think LSU probably gets in. Look, you beat Georgia in that Hoover opener, and that probably removes all doubt. We'll see how that one goes. Ole Miss, Ole Miss really got everybody's hopes up after just stunningly taking 2 of 3 from A&M last weekend. Ole Miss just gets 1 win in this, and they're probably in tournament consideration. Instead, they get swept. They are now 11-19, 32 RPI. Ole Miss really needs to get a win over Mississippi State, I think, to have any hopes of getting in. And, if you get that one and you're Ole Miss, you beat Mississippi State, then you got A&M in a Wednesday game. You just took 2 or 3 from A&M, so maybe a matchup well there. But Ole Miss probably going to be on the outside looking in of the NCAA tournament field, barring a little bit of a miracle in Hoover. We'll see how that goes. All right, wrapping it up, we got two more series. Let's start with Auburn, which, speaking of shockers, Auburn taking 2 of 3 from Alabama was a little bit of a stunner. Auburn, in the way it did it, too, was also surprising. Good pitching in game 1, Tanner Bauman, Will Cannon. Game 2 was a little bit more of a slugfest, which I probably would have predicted from these two teams given the composition of those teams and the pitching struggles both have had at times. Auburn wins game 2, 12-11. Cade Ballou, the freshman who's come on like gangbusters lately, continued his hot hitting. He got a home run. I think that's 8 for him. Most of those probably in the last month. Carter Wright drove in 4. So Auburn brought the bats to win game 2, and then Alabama really had to have game 3, and it got it. Ben Hess, second weekend in a row, that kid came up huge. He goes 6 2/3, 3 earned runs, and Alabama's bats just poured it on late. Ian Petritz hit a big home run late. He had 3 RBIs. Gage Miller doing what Gage Miller has done all season. That's driving a bunch of runs. He drove in 5. Alabama, 13-17, 18 in the RPI. You got 5 teams in this league with 13-17 records in the league. Alabama, of those teams, has the highest RPI at 18. The KPI is 17. I think Alabama, of that 13-17 group, probably the safest by virtue of those numbers. Also, if the committee looks at where were teams seated in the SEC tournament, Alabama 7. I think Alabama probably in, even with a loss to South Carolina. But I think winner of that one can feel pretty good about being in. I think even if Alabama loses it, given the computer numbers, it's just hard to see the Tide getting left out in that scenario. Auburn's season is done, but the Tigers can feel a little bit better. They found a little bit of pitching in spots late in the year. They got Cade Ballou really was coming on late in the year. Auburn may have found some young bats to hold into the future, to rebuild. Butch Thompson's always done this. They will have a bad year, but you can almost count on them to come back with a big season the next year. Butch Thompson really good at mining the transfer portal. He will now have an early start on that as Auburn finishes 8-22 in the SEC, and one of the 2 teams left out of Hoover, the other one being Missouri, which took the final game at Mississippi State, but State won 2 of the first 3 in that series. It got a 4-3 win on Friday. Who else? Cal Steven, 6 innings, 3 earned runs, 8 strikeouts as they get the win. Amani Larry and Bryce Chance each had home runs for State. Larry got another one the next day as, again, no surprise, starting pitching carried State in this one. Tarangelo St. just 7 innings, 2 runs. They get an 8-2 win. Hunter Hines also added a home run. And then State really kind of needed this game 3 for reasons I'll tell you in just a minute. But that was not how it went down. Missouri with nothing to play for other than not finishing last in the SEC, which it did. It edged Auburn by getting a win in that one to finish 9-21 in the league. Missouri gets that one by a 4-3 count. Jackson Lovich had a 2-run home run in the 7th inning. And now for my RPI gripe. I think Mississippi State, to me, passes the look test as a host team. 12 in KPI, but 23 in RPI. And here's why. You get punished by playing subpar RPI teams. And Missouri's not awful. They're 101 in the RPI, but this is what I hate. Mississippi State probably would have had a better chance to host if the series just got rained out. You don't play any games. At that point, State would have finished what? 15-12 in the league. But I think the RPI for State, I want to say around 15 coming into the weekend. State instead wins 2 of 3 and drops from 15 or so to 23 in the RPI. And again, some of that's Missouri. Some of that is also playing at home. I still think it's 17-13 in the league. I don't know when the last time was that wasn't good enough to host. Somebody could probably look that up and let me know. I think State is deserving of a host team, but that RPI puts maybe a little bit of a question into it. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm making too much of it, but we'll wait and see how that goes. I think State, if you want to be sure, take that opener from Ole Miss in the tournament on Wednesday night, and congratulations, State. You get that dreaded last game in Hoover, which that can start at 9:30, 10 at night. You just hope that the games in front of you don't run over. You hope there's no rain. But I have been in that ballpark many a time for that late nighter, and you get out at 1:32 in the morning sometimes if things go wrong. That is State's fate now. It will play Ole Miss in that last game. As for Missouri, team got better this year. Limited talent under Carrick Jackson, but this team, second half of SEC play, didn't win most of the series, may not have won any of them other than Florida, but was competitive. And again, nothing to play for in this series. And you get a couple of one-run games. One goes Missouri's way, one does not. But Carrick Jackson, I think you have to consider this season a little bit of a success for him under the circumstance. Just not a lot of returning talent to a team that is 14 of 14 in the league. Just the commitment to baseball at Missouri hasn't been what it's been at other places. But I think this year a small victory for Carrick Jackson. You got to be a little bit encouraged with what he did this year. Again, not just the record, but the way this team played. All right. We are going to do all SEC teams. We'll do those Sunday night in a live stream and our awards special. We'll preview the SEC tournament later in the week. I'll be down in Hoover for a day or two at least, covering that depending on the family schedule here. But in any case, thank you for watching our SEC baseball coverage. I'm Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 14, presented by Bet Online.